So I opened up the spigots, and within months, we had 300 employees. 250 were black and 50 were white. It was amazing. It was an amazing experience. Believe me, I saw a lot of racism during that period. Some people didn't like that. It was a huge cultural change, and it was one of the most rewarding experiences I've ever had in my life. And I had a visitor from another place say to me, we had at the time a basement office with poor lighting and a low ceiling, and I had somebody say to me who was visiting, John, it's getting really dark in here. So you don't tell me racism exists, it exists. And I said, the smartest line I've ever said in my life, I said, I know, I've got to do something about the lighting. And I said, oh, by the way, look at so-and-so, number 1 in the country. Look at so-and-so, number 2 in the country. And I just started going through the numbers because they're up on the wall. And they left me alone after that.
Is entrepreneurship dead? My good buddy John Tillman with the American Culture Project is going to answer that for us. But first, don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel. Click that little bell, get notified when we put out new content, and find this on podcasts on your favorite platform. All right, Tillman, what is American culture?
Well, American culture versus American Culture Project. I'll take the latter, not the former, but the latter will be informing the former. Did you follow that?
I sadly did.
We're a national organization, much like Independence Institute works on public policy in Colorado. We work on public policy all around the country, both doing the educational work with our 501c3 status, which you can only do educational things. American Culture Project under the IRS regulatory code, which we love so much, is a C4. We do advocacy, we do get out the vote, early voting work. And in particular, we're trying to educate the voting public, particularly independent voters, on the dangers and evils of the teachers' unions.
That's good stuff. I want to talk about you for a second. You never started your life and your work to be in this world.
No.
Did you out of college, doing whatever, and you said, you know what? I want to run think tanks. I want to get into the ideological fights. I want to fight political battles for liberty, freedom, and the American way. What did you do when you got out of college? Tell me about your first job.
Well, my first job was running call centers, which of course, John, means we have to have a drink because every time you say in Colorado or I say call center, we have to have a cocktail. And thank you for providing this fine local Stranahan's whiskey. It's very good, and people should go out and buy a case of it immediately and send it to my address in Gulf, Illinois. But I started out running call centers, and I always joke that running call centers taught me everything I needed to know about leadership management.
A call center is people are calling in because they're either looking to buy something, for help on something. What were you selling?
We did both inbound and outbound. Early in my career was all outbound, which is much tougher than inbound. And we cold called people, which everybody loves. And then, of course, we had what we called customer file, which were renewals of various products that we sold. We sold magazine subscriptions, children's books. We sold telephone services right after telephone deregulation in 1984.
I think I got all your phone calls.
Yes, well, we put you on the list over and over again. We had special people dedicated to the Caldera household. And we sold call waiting, call forwarding, three-way calling back when that was a novelty and a service in the early days of deregulation.
What did you learn through that? I mean, you talk about it a lot. What was the lesson out of working in a call center with that much turnover, that many people, that amount of rejection? Nothing compared to the sexual rejection you get, but still a lot of rejection. What did you learn from it all?
Well, when it comes to sexual rejection, we could probably do a whole show from your experiences on that. But in terms of my experiences in the call center, what I learned is that the human struggle is real, that all people, no matter how successful they've been or if they're in the middle of a struggle and a calamity in their life, that giving people a hand up, giving people encouragement, trying to tune into what makes people tick and help them find their inner strength they don't even know they have and help them being successful is redemptive.
You're not talking about the customer as much as you're talking about the people you worked with.
Yeah, that was sort of our innovation in my operations. One of the reasons we had quite a bit of success is I kind of rejected the mindset of the company because you're a rebel, John, I'm a little bit of a rebel. You know, and the mindset was the customer. It's all about the people paying us the money. What I realized very early on that is the net result of something that happens upstream of that. And it was always for me, the customer was actually the person applying for the job to work in the call center. Nobody goes to work in a call center, mostly part-time employees, or Our management team is full-time, but part-time employees, they're all working in a call center out of financial desperation. They're in a crisis. They don't have enough money for one reason or another. They're taking on a second job. They're going to add a 20 to 25, 30-hour part-time job to their 40-hour full-time job. So this is a very stressful thing to do. They're working till 9:30, 10 o'clock at night, calling all across the country. And what I learned very early on is more fulfilling for us as sales managers, our team, and it was more rewarding for us, and it was so satisfying to help these people solve their financial problem by turning them into great salespeople. And that's what we tried to focus on. We tried to make sure every single person knew that they could sell. I'd have housewives come in and divorced fathers come in and I'd say, "Have you ever sold before?" And they'd say, "No, I've never sold anything in my life." And I'd say, "Really? Do you have children?" "Yes." "You ever try to get them to clean their room, do their homework?" "Well, yeah." And I said, "That's selling. If you can do that, you can do this." And many of them did. Not everybody made it, but we had very low turnover relative to the norm as a result.
Later on, you opened up a retail shop. I'm just doing this background because I find it fascinating people's journey to get to where they find their most happiness. So you're selling sports equipment.
Yes, I own 2 Play-It-Again sports stores. I opened the first urban Play-It-Again sports store in the country. I had a suburban store I opened in 1993, April of 1993, and then a little over a year later, August of 1994, I opened a store in the city of Chicago in a neighborhood that wasn't all that great. It was not bad, but it wasn't like happening. Today, it's an amazing neighborhood. We're one of the first retailers, modern retailers, if you will, to go in there. And both those stores did extremely well for a long time. But I also almost went bankrupt running that business. And I wanted to get into sports. I was a sports nut, played all the sports, was a skier. My original idea, since we're here in Colorado, was to open a used ski shop selling used ski equipment. And then I realized that was too narrow, particularly in Chicago. So I had heard about this franchise system called Play-It-Again Sports and eventually bought some territories. And we did pretty well in many ways, but I realized a few years in that I was not set to be a lifer as a retailer. It's a very challenging business.
You have the entrepreneurial gene.
Yes.
It's that spark. And it's such an American thing. It's such a Colorado thing. You see something and you go, there is a step missing right there. People need that. And I bet if somebody supplied that good, that service, it would help them out. Oh, and I could make a lot of money. Is that the American culture?
I think it's a big part of the American culture, and I think it's in part based upon the kind of people who have emigrated here for over 200 years. People think about the entrepreneurial act of getting on a ship in the 1700s or the 1600s, for God's sake, and even right up until the 1800s, early 1900s, getting on a ship and bringing your family and all that you have to come to a place you've never been and may not know the language. My grandfather came in 1909 by himself and was a dishwasher in Chicago, Illinois for many years, and eventually his 9-year-old son came some years later. Then eventually my grandmother and my 2 aunts came, and my mother was born in a cold water flat at 18th and Wabash in Chicago. Think about that entrepreneurial act. And this country has been built by people who wanted to come and have that act. And I think there's 2 kind of, at war in our country today are the 2 elements of that entrepreneurial spirit as well as what I'll call the dependency and victimization spirit. On the one hand, we as a human species, we like to build, we like to collaborate, we like to work with others to achieve things that we have, that desires and goals that we have in common. And that's been true from the beginning of human history, in my view. You think about a hunter and gatherer in original communities when they formed and families formed. I'm sure the very first woman in the old, stereotype of the cavemen dragging the woman into the cave, I'm sure she immediately began to redecorate the place, right? And had him going out and trying to find some sort of new rock to put in the corner where they could put a cup of coffee or whatever their version of that was.
By the way, the sexism of all that was just wonderful.
Yeah, other than the sexism, right? But that is such a funny little stereotype from our sort of human shared history.
It's the Flintstones.
What's that? The Flintstones, right. But my point with that is that people come together to build from the beginning of time, and that is still true today, whether you want to talk about Elon Musk and what he's done, which he's an incredible entrepreneur, Steve Jobs, whoever you want to pick. The other side of the coin, though, is that sort of feeling that, sometimes it's nice to feel like a victim. Sometimes it's nice to have somebody come along and tell you, you don't have a fair lot in life. And, you really need to be taken care of. And what's happened to you is not your fault. It's because you're black or you're brown or you're tall or you're short or you're a new immigrant or your sexuality has something to do with it. And only the government can come in and properly fix these problems and allocate opportunity and resources. And this whole idea of individual sovereignty and the individual focus on the founding fathers about individuals control their government, that's really kind of an old idea. And we really need to come together collectively to fix these problems. And it's really those wealthy people and those business entrepreneurs who are taking advantage of the system and they're cheating you, and we need to fix it. And if you're struggling in life, and everybody struggles, we all struggle at some point or another, we all sometimes feel like we get a raw deal, that can be a very compelling argument. It's very seductive. And these two visions of the humans, there are two competing forces for those two aspects of the human nature. And what has always made America exceptional is that we've rewarded, we've cherished, we've revered that entrepreneurial spirit. And even if you're not an entrepreneur, that desire to work with one and build, grow your community, grow your church, grow the Little League baseball, go and be a friend of the parks, whatever it might be. And now the other side of it is just get on your Game Boy and be taken care of. It's really horrible what the other side is doing.
A buddy of mine is Jewish, and I asked him, he's an entrepreneur, and he owns several businesses, a young guy. And I was like, why are Jews particularly great entrepreneurs? What is it that, as a percentage, there's only 15 million Jewish people in the whole planet. And I thought, is it a cultural thing? Is it, the financial aspect that they did fractional banking before anyone else? And he said, no, we're always on the run. That culturally, we know that we can get kicked out of wherever we are, and we're almost nomadic. And so in order to survive, you come to a new place, you come to a new country, and you see opportunity, and you take the opportunity because you have to in order to survive. It amazes me still, and I've heard the statistic several times, something like 80% of all first-generation millionaires are immigrants.
Not only is that true, John, one of the more amazing, a corollary statistic to that point is that the highest generators of wealth as a generational cohort are the children of immigrants. And when you think about it, it's obvious why. Their parents came here for all the reasons we've just discussed, but the children, whether they were very young when they came here, I have a business partner, Annie Hathaway, on one of my projects, and an amazing woman that I spontaneously met and started discussing this business idea. And I said to her, I'd really like to do this business idea, but I really would need to have a partner who's an UI UX designer. And they designs the interface.
That's a computer thing.
Yeah, it designs the interfaces we all use. And she looked at me and she goes, I'm a UI UX designer. And so we sat there for 2 hours on a handshake and made a deal. She came here from the Dominican Republic at 9 years old. But anyway, the children of immigrants are the largest generators of generational wealth. And to your point about Israel, a small country. It's amazing how small Israel actually is in terms of population, land area, et cetera. They have the second largest number of NASDAQ startups in the world, only behind the United States. Think about that.
That's amazing. So the immigrant comes here, becomes the first 80% of all first-generation millionaires, immigrants. These are guys who come here. They don't speak the language. They don't know the culture. They don't know the laws. They don't have the connections. And sometimes they come with a shirt on their back, and they come here and they see hard work, opportunity there, opportunity there, opportunity there, opportunity there, while Americans who were born and bred here over generations, we trip over these opportunities. We never see them because we got it made. And the guy who is, as you say, in those two sides, the guy back home playing Nintendo, getting a check, he doesn't have to go find these things. And I think about the crime we are committing, not just to ourselves financially and future generations, but the crime we're committing to that man, to say, because you're a victim, you can't see all the other opportunities that these other people have, or just the dignity of making your own money. Because if you're not making your own money, I don't know where your self-worth comes from. But we'll take care of you. We are destroying that person. We are committing a crime against that person, telling him, you are a victim. Yeah,
this is one of my favorite topics. I'm so glad you brought it up. The destruction of human agency. what we're essentially saying to people is we're going to put you in a canoe, in a river. You don't have to make any choices. We're going to guide you down the river, and we're going to choose your life for you. You might remember during the Obama administration, the life of Julia.
Life of Julia.
Remember the life of Julia? You know, from the moment you're born to the moment you're put in the dirt, or
hand in hand with government from birth until you're put in the ground.
And what that does is it destroys the very essence of the human condition. And the essence of the human condition, the higher order essence of the human condition, has always been to create. Human beings are creators, builders at our core. And circumstances occasionally deter us from that. But now you have a cultural mindset where we actually want to purposely destroy that desire to create. In fact, the whole idea of, some things that are going on with the arguments about systemic racism, that the word work, showing up on time, having a work ethic, studying hard, these are now perceived in some quarters as negative, when work is the ultimate pathway to freedom and independence for each soul on this planet, and people are encouraging the opposite.
It is the key to self-direction. It is the key to controlling your own destiny. All right, that's really nice, Tillman. That's nice. You white guy, you own the store, you live in a nice neighborhood, you probably play golf a lot. I bet you even smoke cigars. But a guy in the hood, he can make $13 an hour working at McDonald's, and you're telling him, man, that's the way to do it. Good for you. That guy's going to give you the finger. Tell him why that job at McDonald's, which in Denver is now $18.30 as the minimum wage.
Burgers taste a lot better, I'm sure.
I'm sure they taste a lot better. Explain to him why it's better for him to go to work rather than just receive about the same amount of money staying at home.
Well, when you choose the dependency route that we're talking about here, and don't go work at McDonald's, what you accept is what I call a dependency ceiling. The moment you choose that path, yes, you're taken care of. Yes, you don't have to worry about whether your rent's paid. You can still have cable TV. You'll still have the internet. You'll still have your cell phone. If it gets hot, you probably can turn on the air conditioning. You're well cared for.
We can keep you drugged up enough with entertainment and electronics.
All of that is true. But you have an upside ceiling that you cannot go above once you choose that path. And you actually, there's a lot of research on this, your brain functioning actually starts to deteriorate. And
so you're calling me stupid too?
Well, I'm not saying that yet, but John, there is, it does come eventually for all of us. So you give up your self-direction, you give up your potential, but you have security. It's very seductive. And I think you might have a quote here from Thomas Jefferson about people, the chaotic seas of liberty versus what is the quote?
Timid men prefer the calm seas of despotism than the storms of freedom or something like that.
And despotism in this case is dependency. And the other side of the coin, of course, is the idea of a self-directed life. What the founders understood, and I think our generation has lost a little bit, is the founders understood this idea. The feudal system was a dependency system. You were dependent on the crown, and you lived in this feudal system, and you were dependent on your lord, whoever the duke, whoever was in charge of your particular place, and everything flowed from that. I mean, we've all seen Downton Abbey. We know how it worked. And what the founders understood, though, that true freedom, to use Maslow's words, self-actualization, comes from those chaotic seas of liberty, and that you actually will be more secure in liberty because you are self-directed. And even if your motor doesn't run as fast as your neighbor's, you'll benefit from his motor running because he's going to go out and farm all that wheat and make bread that you can get from him, and you can kind of laze along and be a blacksmith, which actually is a pretty hard job, or maybe a cobbler or whatever it might be. But you might not have quite as much energy as him, but you're going to benefit from all those people that the system makes prosperous, and then everybody benefits from that prosperity.
My big worry is what it does to the human mind, the human soul, if you will, when we tell little kids, you're privileged, that person is a victim, and that person is a victim because you're privileged. And what it does is it says, you little kid, you're privileged, so you don't need to go off and create more. And you, victim, well, you can't create. And what a sad, if you were going to demoralize a country, let's just say you were going to invade a country, but you had a 100-year time frame to do so. If you wanted to demoralize a country, that's how you would do it. You would tell people that the builders, the creators, the ones who gave us the wealth that has never been matched in all of human history. He said, yeah, but not, you can't do that because the system's rigged against you. I've seen the statistics of black immigrants coming here from Ivory Coast and other places.
West Africa in particular.
Yeah. And how within one generation they become millionaires. And it makes me wonder, well, hang on a second. Don't they have all the same discrimination that any black man in America has, plus all the cultural differences, plus the language differences? So it makes me wonder, is it really a systemically racist society, or is that something that fits a wonderful narrative?
There's no question there's racism. I've encountered people who are racist. I don't hear it regularly, and it certainly is not what it was in the 80s.
And you and I, of our age, we heard it a lot more when we were kids.
Oh, yeah. I remember, this is forgive the self-serving nature of this story, but I'll never forget this. I remember in the 80s. So when I was in the call center business, I took over an office. Well, this is actually really, I hope your audience finds this interesting.
I know they've all turned to reruns of Hogan's Heroes.
We're down to 2 viewers now. When I started in the call center business, I was actually in college at Wayne State University, a predominantly African-American, urban, 45,000 students in the middle of Detroit. Probably 70% of the student population was black, 30% was white. Very interesting experience. Lived a mile off campus. I was the only white guy that would ride the bus out to Southfield for my part-time job working in the call center while I was a college student. That call center in Southfield, Michigan was about 60% white employees, 40% black, but mostly working class. This was in the early 80s when the auto industry was going through its tank. Then I get my first branch assignment, take over an office in Washington, D.C. 60% white, 40% black. Everybody had a degree, black and white alike. Everybody was professional. They were working there because they were desperate to social climb, get better houses, live in better neighborhoods, white and black alike. It was a fascinating dynamic, these two places. Then I come to Chicago. I take over an office with 80 employees, 60 white, 20 black. The key to that business was how many people called you every week looking for a job. In Washington, I'd get about 20 calls a week. In Detroit, we got about 40 calls a week. I was getting 300 phone calls in the first 3 days of the week. It was overwhelming. Wow. It was a huge burden. It was very stressful. And of those 300 phone calls, about 250 of them were coming from African Americans living on the west side and south side of Chicago. And my predecessor would screen them out because he didn't think people who sounded like they were from the city could sell to people in Alabama and Mississippi and North Carolina and Oregon or wherever. And of course, I knew that was wrong because I lived in this very integrated place and I knew that was BS. And so I opened up the spigots, and within months, we had 300 employees. 250 were black and 50 were white. It was amazing. It was an amazing experience. Believe me, I saw a lot of racism during that period. Some people didn't like that. It was a huge cultural change, and it was one of the most rewarding experiences I've ever had in my life. And it really proved.
How did they do professionally? How were the numbers?
Oh, I had the 4-time defending champion in one of our divisions, a repeated national champion in the second division, and a top 10 performer in the third division. We were the second largest office in the company and one of the top performers. And it was such a story that people came out to see what was going on. And I had a visitor from another place say to me, we had at the time a basement office with poor lighting and a low ceiling. And I had somebody say to me who was visiting, John, it's getting really dark in here. So you don't tell me racism exists, it exists. And I said, the smartest line I've ever said in my life, I said, I know, I've got to do something about the lighting. And I said, oh, by the way, look at so-and-so, #1 in the country. Look at so-and-so, #2 in the country. And I just started going through the numbers because they're up on the wall. And they left me alone after that. And but let me just very quickly, Dr. Orphe Divange, a good friend from Gabon, Africa, in West Africa, his answer to your question is, why does this happen? Nigerians, by the way, are the second highest accumulators of wealth of immigrant groups. Second only to Asians, by the way, Nigerians. And they're black, from Africa. What is going on? That was your question a moment ago. What is going on is, yes, there's racism. It's not as bad as people want to portray it, but it's true, it's there. They ignore it and move on and do what they can because they're self-accountable. They have agency. They haven't been told they're going to be a victim. Orphe tells me, you know why they don't think they're a victim? It's because in Gabon, Africa, if you're a victim, you're not going to eat. You're not going to have a roof over your head. You're not going to have clothing. Nobody tolerates a victim mindset in West Africa. You got to carry your weight.
We don't reward it.
Exactly.
You can't reward it. Yeah, a quick statistic of how racist the society is. There is no guide to how racist people are. You can't plug their brains into a machine and take a poll. But the Census Bureau does keep an eye on mixed race couples and mixed race babies, which are growing exponentially. So we are such a racist society. We keep getting it on with the people we hate and having little babies. And at some point in the future, you cannot say race is the reason for discrimination because everybody's going to be an American mutt.
Yes.
And I love it. All right.
I do too.
I want to leave some time for thoughts on these folks as voting blocks. We're talking about race. There is this sense that the left owns these voting blocks. Republicans, old white guys, but blacks, Hispanics, other minorities, these are, the left has them, Democrats have them, you're not going to shake them. I think that's changing. I think Trump is showing that's changing. You have a theory about this. Talk to me.
Well, I have been obsessed with this for a very long time, and particularly after the 2012 election, there was this theory called the Blue Wall. The Blue Wall were all the states that voted Democratic from 1988, roughly 84, reliably Democratic up through 2012. And those states, when you add them up, were 242 of the 270 electoral votes you needed. So all the punditry class on the left and right thought the Democrats had a permanent governing majority because they only had to get another 28 electoral votes to win, and that would be easy among the swing states. And so the theory on the right was that we have to find a candidate who can win all the swing states and we got to run the table. I thought that was stupid. We should actually look at the blue wall and what its underlying weakness is. And it turns out the underlying weakness of the blue wall is that they're extremely dependent on Black voters, Hispanic voters, single women, and then millennials. Millennials are starting to age out, but younger voters 18 to 29. So in 2012, Obama got 93% of the Black vote, 71% of the Hispanic vote, 67% of single women, and 60% of millennials. Now, that's a lot of numbers, but the basic point is big majorities. And he had to because Romney got 60% of the white vote. And Obama only got 39% of the white vote. Nobody ever talks about that. And it has nothing to do with Obama's race. This is true of every Democrat nominee trending over time. So the solution is there was this recent Supreme Court case in Wisconsin where the Wisconsin Supreme Court is rewriting the maps and gerrymandering more favorable Democrat districts. And the way they're doing that is creating little spokes from the city out to the exurbs and suburbs where you bring in Black and Hispanic voters from Milwaukee, for example, or Dane County, and you make better Democrat because they think they own those voters. So I wrote a letter to the Wall Street Journal that, the way the Republicans can counter this is to actually make an ongoing, sustained, genuine appeal to Black and brown voters. Oh, and single women and younger voters too. And that's starting to actually happen. And it has been happening for some time. And I think that is not only good for creating competitive elections between the two parties, but I actually think it's good for the country because the better the Republicans get at appealing to African Americans and Hispanics, the better off the country will be. And the question then is, how do you appeal to them? And I think the antidote is what we've been talking about throughout most of this conversation. You appeal to them through opportunity, through agency, and reject the dependency the other side is selling you. Reject the victim machine that the other side is selling you.
It's interesting that male African Americans are peeling off for Trump. Did in the past, and looks like they might again in the future. This was not supposed to happen. And it doesn't take massive numbers of defections from what is seen as, the solid bloc. Here in Colorado, it's the Hispanic vote. Right. Down south in Pueblo, we're seeing this traditionally blue area, union area, starting to turn more red, turning more conservative. And there seems to be this fight starting to happen between people who work, those old union guys, and the progressive elite who have all the college degrees, who know how other people should live. And this the media loves to talk about the dysfunction in the Republican world, and God knows it's there.
There's plenty.
There's plenty. You could just go every day. But in a state like Colorado, it doesn't matter. Republicans own nothing of power. Nothing. Nothing. And so keep reporting on it, but sooner or later, you're going to have to start looking at the dysfunction inside the left. And that's the real story that's going on in Colorado, and I think also in other places.
Well, one of the things I think is, I think group identity politics is a cancer in our society, and it has to be destroyed.
Well, stop there. Why is it a cancer? I agree with you. I find it the most racist, ugly.
Because it is racist.
It is.
It's
the
overtly
definition.
racist.
Right. And it says you are your skin color. You are your genitals. You are what you do in bed. That's not who you are.
This is the essence of it. The group identity politics says that your whole persona is downstream determined by your group identity. We have assigned you from the Cherry Creek or whatever the wealthy community is here and the North Shore of Chicago. You know, the elite, highly educated white people have assigned everybody these group identities in elites in universities and affluent people, partly as their guilt, their white guilt problem. But the reason it's so destructive, though, you alluded to this earlier in your comments about attacking people's sense of agency and the sense of self-direction. It divides people. E pluribus unum, out of many one. That has always been true in this country, and there were tremendous cultural and even racial divisions. My mother was Greek, and Greeks were treated very poorly, certainly not as poorly as African Americans. But there's been a long history of the newcomers being treated poorly, and then assimilation happens, and we start to intermarry, as you alluded to early, and eventually we all live with one another. And here's the bottom line. Anybody watching this show, when you're out in the everyday world, when you're just out in the wilding, right, everyday world, you encounter people that are different than you. You encounter people with purple hair, people like different sexuality, black, brown, white, tall, short, fat, skinny, some Wyoming people, for God's sakes, you let come down here. And you know what? No one cares. All you actually care about is your human interaction. What group identity politics does is it devalues the humanity of an individual. We've done a bunch of research on this, a lot of focus groups and some other research. What we found from the focus groups with African Americans and Hispanics in particular is they want their identity to be, it's part of them. They want it to be seen, they want it to be respected, but they don't want their total self defined by that. And one of the reasons I think these voters are moving, to come back to that question, is because what trumps your identity? Your life situation. You're a working class guy trying to build a business. You're in our area, one of the biggest entrepreneurial ventures is people running landscaping businesses in Florida and in Illinois. It's incredible, and I talk to them all the time, and their sense of opportunity, their optimism at the businesses they're building, it is the American dream happening right in front of your eyes, and they love it, and they don't want to be put in a pigeonhole of victimization. They feel empowered. It's so exciting.
The idea that you are preordained to be on the bottom end of the scale. The organization that does that is not business. Business doesn't care. If women truly are 80 cents on the dollar, what company wouldn't hire all women and make 20% more savings? Duh. But it's the government. If there was ever a systemically racist pressure, I'll give you two. One, public education. Public education says, oh, you live in this neighborhood, you have that income, you're stuck into this failing school, there's no way out. If you had money, you could get out. The one that gets me a lot that people don't seem to get is mobility. That you cannot live the American dream if you don't have mobility. Show me a man who can go as far as his legs will take him. I'll show you a man in despair. But show me a man who will go as far as public transit will take him, and I will show you a man who forever will be on the bottom rung of the ladder, especially in western cities like Denver. This means that if you live on a bus route and work on a bus route, and you can work when the bus is going and get there, that's your opportunity. When you get that $500 car like I got in college, then all of a sudden the entire metro area is your oyster. And everywhere you can drive, you can live where it's least expensive. You can work where it's most profitable. You can start your business. You can go to the school you want to go to. And what do? Instead, we build these transit systems that tax poor working people with sales tax, suck up the money, so that guys with cars in their garage don't pay parking when they go to a Rockies game.
Right.
If there was something that was truly racially racist and systemic, that's it. And I'm starting to see people who are on the other end of that going, wait a second, I don't need another bus pass. I need a car. I need a car.
Well, think about, I've heard you talk about this before, and I'd never really thought about it until you introduced it to me, and I've thought about it a lot since, because I think it's a fascinating idea that is very unconventional. People don't think about it. At the Illinois Policy Institute, where I was the longtime CEO and now chairman, we've started I don't really love the name of this, but we call it the Poverty Solutions Center. I wanted to call it the Urban Opportunity Center. But in a sense, we are trying to hit poverty head on. Why does poverty happen? And when Matt Paprocki, who's now the CEO there, and I were discussing this, one of the questions I challenged him with is, go out and find me all of the policies on the right, the conservative policies that will help people in urban areas who are poor become prosperous or more prosperous. And you know what, John? There's a lot of work to be done. There's a lot of opportunity for creative thinkers. And I think your idea about transportation and creating mobility is really good
at Independence, we have been pushing for the idea of transit vouchers, the idea of means testing. The transit agency you see here, RTD, is 95% government subsidized. 5% comes from customers. And those customers, imagine if they had to pay full fare. The idea is charge full fare, but give a means-tested voucher to the transit dependent, those who are too old, too infirm, too poor to be able to drive, and let them take a bus if they want, take an Uber if they want, to do a ride share if they want, or heaven forbid, buy a car. But then it blows into the urban growth folks who want to plan our societies, make sure we live in pack and stack housing, and we have no roads to drive on, and just rail lines back and forth, as if this was 1905. That is the racism in America, and black, brown, poor people need to stand up and get their share and say, this is the system that's oppressing me. This education system is oppressing me. The unions, the teachers' union is oppressing me. Set me free so I can live the American dream. But we've got to stop vilifying the American dream. You've got a big idea on stopping vilifying the idea of entrepreneurship.
Well,
Am I talking about it now?
No, I'd love to talk about it. So my vision is to build an entrepreneur hall of fame. We call it the Entrepreneur Hall of Giants for copyright reasons. I think you think about right now where we're sitting, every physical thing in this room except our physical selves, everybody watching right now on their laptop or their phone or their television at home, and everything in their house, it all started because an entrepreneur had an idea to start a business to do what? What does an entrepreneur do when they start a business? Well, the first thing they do is they put their own money in and maybe raise some money. Then they hire people and give them jobs, and they collaborate, as we were talking about earlier, to build something to serve people well. Free enterprise, the founding principles of this country, capitalism is the greatest service enterprise ever invented in the human sphere outside of spirituality. And it works because when you build a business to serve other people well, whether it's a television or a nice bourbon like this, or scotch, I should say, you're rewarded when you do it well. People come back and they give you more money, and they give you repeat business and maybe a nice word of mouth. If you do it poorly, if people get sick when they eat your food at your restaurant, you're going to go out of business pretty quickly. There's tremendous direct, immediate feedback and accountability in the private enterprise system, and that's why it works so well. In government, accountability is delayed and diffused. But what's interesting to me is we know this. We've, in the past, revered entrepreneurs, but now everybody loves the entrepreneur when they're mortgaged to the hilt, might not make their next payroll, and they're living hand to mouth. People love that story. But God forbid you make it to the penthouse and you get a private jet, you are now an enemy of the people. This is BS. We should revere the entrepreneurs every direction when they're rising, and some of them fall backwards, and everybody in their failure iterations that they go through, because there's a lot of failure when you're an entrepreneur. I know this from experience. I've had a lot of failure. And I want to build a Hall of Giants that is a little bit Hollywood meets Rock and Roll Hall of Fame meets Disney World. A very experiential, immersive, probably a $300 to $400 million facility, site yet to be determined. We're in the seed funding stage, so I've raised a significant amount of money. I've hired a CEO to do the research, do the proof of premise, We're going to do a couple small exhibits that'll be permanent exhibits that we learn from. So this will probably be a 10-year undertaking, but I'm very excited about it because I think entrepreneurs are one of the greatest forces for good in the human sphere to improve the human condition.
A couple things. Entrepreneurs, when they become big, we vilify them. They deserve vilification when they start using their power to stop competition.
Absolutely.
When we're talking cronyism.
Yes.
When they're using this so that they can get tax breaks for their industry and not the others. When IKEA moves into Denver and they get a TIF, tax increment financing package, but Mom's Furniture Store doesn't, then you've got their political power being able to play winners and losers. That's an evil that needs to be eradicated.
Absolutely.
Something you didn't mention, which is what all these guys did, is the R word, risk. That they took risk. We vilify risk. Risk is different than danger. Risk is different than carelessness. Risk is looking at the real world and saying, with my limited amount of resources, including my time and my talents,
and your reputation.
And reputation. I think this is worth risking this. It's not a roulette wheel, but it's not a guarantee that even if you do everything right, you still risk. And when you risk, you can reward. But then finally, when these people get the reward, everyone hates them and no one admires them for the calculated risk, the hard work, the ingenuity, and the ability to do something. I'll keep going with mobility. Greatest American hero in my book, Henry Ford. Henry Ford transformed this country and empowered almost every American with mobility so that he could become king of his own life. Before that, you had to live on the bus line or the train line and work at the factory where it was next. After Henry Ford transformed Western society, we all became agents of power. We all had agency. We all had the ability. And what was so great about my $500 Datsun 210, a real chick magnet mobile, but I could go everywhere the guy in the Lexus could go. And I did it for $500. There was no road that was open to him that was closed to me. And that's, you want to talk equity? That's equity.
I can't remember who it was, an economist some years ago was talking to a group of people, and I was in the audience, and was saying the following, talking about your Datsun 210 and versus the billionaire in his Rolls Royce or his Bentley. The person was saying, imagine an alien comes down and lands in this country, and imagine in this world, and they land in 1600, and they look around. And they see the monarchs and the royalty, and they see the peasant class. And they will see that there's a major difference in the quality of life for those two people. But now imagine that person comes down today, and they see the billionaire, and they see regular people, the peasant class, you and me. They're not going to see a material difference in their actual lifestyle. Yeah, they're going to have a bigger house. Yeah, they shared their private jet with 3 people. I had to share it today flying into Denver with 130 people. It was still a private jet, pretty good, run by United. Not bad, but it's a bigger plane, had better bathrooms, better, I had some food. It was not bad. And when you see, and entrepreneurship is what makes that happen, operating in our free enterprise system, in our capitalist system. It's the greatest force for good. I was at a hotel bar in Kansas City some years ago, and we're talking to this people at the bar, and my buddy Mark Miller was there, and he said, what's that phrase you always say? What's that thing you always say about what we do? I said, well, we're advocates for free enterprise and the founding principles of the country. It's the greatest force for good ever created to improve the human condition, especially for the poor and disadvantaged. The bartender, a young guy, with the look, I can say this now as an old guy, because I used to be the young guy with the look way a long time ago, literally spit out his water. That's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. And he's sitting in a bar in an affluent hotel serving people and making tips, and he doesn't even get the joke that he's making money because of this very system. It's fascinating. And so that is why we need a Hall of Giants celebrating entrepreneurs and entrepreneurship. And we need to tell their story. And the most important part of their story we have to tell is what you just alluded to, is we have to connect the dots, how these services and products improve everyday people's lives and create prosperity. Every dollar that the government spends starts out because an entrepreneur had a business idea and was successful at it. Every dollar a charity spends starts out in the private sector because an entrepreneur had a business idea and started a business. Let us never forget what the root source is. It is entrepreneurship in our free enterprise system that funds government and charity.
I'll bring it home to me. You and I have been friends for a long time. You know that I lost a daughter to cancer. I have a highly handicapped child. And I lost my daughter. There was a great outpouring. I'm glad. I barely survived it. And people look at me and talk to me, and I'm sorry. And there is a genuine empathy, a real passion. Like this is so wrong. And when I was able to get my head above water again, I realized all that love that I got happened because of what you just talked about capitalism, about entrepreneurship. That if I had lost that kid 100 years ago, I would have been like almost every other family in the country, where 1 out of every 4, 1 out of every 5 babies born do not make it to their first birthday. Mine died just a day before. But and that child mortality rates have gone plummeting. Now, is it because the government has done such a superb job with running medicine, or is it because there are companies out there that risk to come up with new developments, new strategies, new techniques, new products, new drugs, new surgeries? When my son came along, he should have died in a month. He had heart surgery at 3 weeks to save him, something that was not even possible maybe even just a few decades ago. That was only made possible because entrepreneurs, people took risks and came up with these. And we have a society with so much wealth that we can afford to save a child like mine. And if he was born somewhere else, if he was born in China, if he was born in Africa, if he was born in Russia, I would have lost another child. That's the real power of it. We can pull out our cell phones and go, look at what Jobs gave us, Steve Jobs gave us. We can go to our computer, look what Microsoft allowed us to do. When you break it down, it is life, it is death, and we don't call it for what it is.
That is a beautiful way to connect the dots on why it matters.
People want to get more information about what you're doing. Where do they go?
They can go to 2 sites, amculture.org.
AmericanCulture.org.
AmericanCulture.org. But AM
Wait a minute, you
culture,
have AM?
AM
Culture.
Culture.org. amculture.org. And then they can also go to thecommandingheights.com, which is sort of my collection of all my writings and material.
And all your film work and
all that sort of thing.
All your starring roles and all the great movies.
Absolutely. Yes.
Tillman, always great.
Thank you so much for having me on,
John.
John.
This is a kick. We'll do it again.
I'll come back every month.
All right. Cheers.
Cheers.
If you enjoyed that conversation, by all means, click one of these other great programs. We have the best conversations with the most fascinating Coloradans. And subscribe to our channel. Just click down below and hit that little bell button too. You don't want to miss a single show.